Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hammer Territory podcast. I'm your host, Brad Rowland. This is going to be our first ever pre-recorded episode because we can. I'm joined on today's podcast by Scott Coleman for an evergreen episode because this player is not going to go anywhere. I would say, unfortunately, for some who don't like it very much. But how are you, sir? Before we dive into Matt Olson on this podcast, what's going on?
Hello, Brad. Hello to one of Matt Olson's most famous high school alumnus. I would put you ahead of Matt Olson. I don't know if you're ahead of Jeff Francoeur.
You're the only one. You're the only person that thinks that I'm ahead of Matt Olson in anything. Yes, just to get this out of the way, I did go to the same high school as Matt Olson. We do not know each other. We've never met, other than I covered the Braves a couple of times around, but he doesn't know who I am. We have no relationship whatsoever. Me and Jeff Francoeur have known each other for a long time. Matt Olson is much younger than I am, better looking than I am, richer than I am, et cetera, et cetera. But we do have that connection. Same high school.
I would like to see Matt Olson host not just one, but two podcasts year-round. Atlanta Braves, Atlanta Hawks.
Two award-winning podcasts.
That's right. That's right. And we are just waiting on our $20 million a year podcast deal. And then, Brad, it really will even out.
Yeah, us and the Kelseys should be getting the same money to do podcasts. Okay, so this is the second one of these we've done. So you and I, in another dead period, recorded the Orlando Arcia / shortstop kind of player capsule episode. We've teased this a little bit throughout the offseason so far. We'll do one for every position probably at some point along the way, right? And first base is one. We went back and forth whether we were going to do first base or third base because those are the two safest ones that they're just not going to change. Matt Olson and Austin Riley are not going to go anywhere, but it's Christmas week as you're going to listen to this podcast most likely. And Matt Olson is not only healthy, he's good, he's well paid. He also is a player that they're really invested in, et cetera, et cetera. Like, he's not going to be going anywhere. It's pretty safe. And he also plays every inning of every game, basically. So it's like, all right, our first base capsule is basically just Matt Olson capsule. So just, that's what this is going to be. Could we mention at some point along the way on this episode, Scott, that like, okay, what happens if Matt Olson gets hurt? We will probably have that discussion for literally 30 seconds. But other than that, it's about Matt Olson, and he's pretty good, Scott, I have to say. So I don't know how you want to dive in here, but do you want to just kind of talk about Matt Olson broadly speaking first, and we'll kind of dig into, you got the contract, you got last season, you got his defense actually had a nice little uptick this year, projections, et cetera. Where are you at with the Matt Olson experience, and how that is maybe difficult to separate from the discussion online about Matt Olson, perhaps? But I'll leave it to you to start this off.
Yeah, I mean, let's just talk about Matt Olson last season. It's weird. I mean, he had a 117 WRC plus, which was top 10 among first basemen in the league. He hit 29 home runs, which was third among first basemen in the league. And he put up a 2.6 WAR, which was seventh among his first base peers. Those numbers are fine. They're not great. This is a guy a year removed from being a legitimate MVP candidate in 2023. But, 117 WRC plus and the home runs and the defense was really good. He actually won the Fielding Bible Award for defense at first base. And, a 2.5 WAR, it's not great, but it's also not terrible by any means. And, first base is interesting right now in Major League Baseball. I think back in the day, or we'll call it your older brother's Major League Baseball, first base was like one of the premium positions. You had a ton of guys who just hit the crap out of the baseball. And first base has kind of dipped off a bit in recent years. And pretty clearly, Matt Olson at worst is a top 5 first baseman. And I think you can make a pretty strong argument he's even better than that.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of metrics that would tell you he might be the second best first baseman in the league. Let's just get this out of the way now, Scott. Unfortunately, the best first baseman in the league is the guy the Braves had before Matt Olson, which changes the way he's discussed, which is not fair at all to him, which is always something I want to point out. And I think it's because I cover players and cover sports in person and go into locker rooms and things. Like, I think it's important to note these guys are like humans, and it's not Matt Olson's fault that he's not Freddie Freeman. Like, has nothing to do with Matt Olson. They hired Matt Olson, quote unquote. They've traded for him to do a job, and he's been quite good at his job since arriving in Atlanta. It's been inconsistent a little bit. The one season was incredible. The other two have just been fine, etc. It's fine to good. By the way, even his down fine season is still really quite good, which you did a good job of laying out. We're not gonna talk. There's no point of talking about Freddie Freeman anymore. Like it's just that it's water under the bridge. It happened. It's unfortunate. I think he should have stayed in Atlanta forever. All these things. We've been on the record about this. We covered it on our old podcast. There was a mess of a negotiation. He fired his agents. Like, place the blame wherever you want to place the blame on that. I would encourage you not to place it all on the Braves. At least give some of it to Freddie / his agent side. It's not a one unilateral decision, but that out of the way, Matt Olson is really good. And we'll see how good he is this next season. But yeah, I think that you could very reasonably look at Matt Olson's profile and say the only first baseman in baseball that you would rather have is Freddie Freeman. Like you could, there are other guys too. You might take Bryce Harper as a full-time first baseman now. Bryce Harper's really good. So if you want to take Bryce Harper, totally understandable. There's some other guys too, but he's definitely in the top 5. I think that's not even like us being homers. Like if you look at this profile, that's where he is. Was he that good this year? No, he was 7th in baseball in WAR, but that's one season after he was the year before he was number 2, but only because Freddie was incredible. Like he had an MVP level season in 2023. I think that's been forgotten because his teammate won the MVP and deservedly so in Rowland Acuna. Yeah. And Matt finished 4th in the voting, but Matt Olson's 23 season would have won MVP in several seasons. So he's capable of that. He's also capable of what happened this last year where he was a 2.5, 3-win player. Really good. I would call Matt Olson a star. I mean, I don't think that's hyperbole. You can debate whether he's a superstar or not. He's not Shohei Ohtani. He's not Aaron Judge, but he's a star level player. So is Riley. The Braves have plenty of stars, but Matt Olson is one of them. And I think that even last year, like he had this slow start, and it's not we won't parse every month of the season. But I think if you start his campaign on February 1st, on May 1st of last season, his numbers jump quite a bit. Like he gets into that 125-ish WRC plus and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it is what it is, but he was good last season, even if he was not great last season.
And on the whole, so Matt Olson's 3 seasons with the Braves, he has a 133 WRC plus.
Really good.
Really, really good. And in that same time period, since the Braves traded for Olson, he has a 12.2 WAR, which is second best among all major league first basemen. So again, man, if Matt Olson replaced literally anyone but Freddie Freeman, I think we would maybe subconsciously think of even more of Matt Olson. And I mean, I can speak for myself, and I think this podcast that we fully acknowledge Matt Olson is a really, really good baseball player. And the fact is he has 5 more years on that deal, and the Braves are going to need him. And I think it's fair to say the Braves need more out of Matt Olson next year, because while he was totally fine this past season with a 117 WRC plus, we know and have seen firsthand that Matt Olson can be even better than that. And he's been a streaky hitter too. I mean, his hot streaks, man, he can single-handedly carry that lineup when he's going at his best.
Yeah, and look, on Matt's front about the last 3 seasons overall, it's a good point to bring up because I think it's smarter to holistically look. One season's a big sample in baseball. I'm not saying that it's not. That's part of the appeal of baseball. It's such a big sample as the season goes along. But if you zoom out to 3 years, you zoom out to even his time in Oakland, this is not a new thing. He's not an unproven player. He's very, very proven. We'll talk about later on with his durability. But the batted ball profile is really good last year. It was not as good as it was in 2023. So it's not like he just got unlucky this year compared to the previous year. He had a uniquely awesome batted ball and production season in 2023. Both of those things fell last year. But I think actually, if you look at the batted ball data, he should have been a little bit better than he was last year, which encourages me. I think that he's still hitting the ball really hard. He has massive power. He takes walks, et cetera, et cetera. So I am encouraged by that overall profile. And yeah, we can leave it there. But I think that, we agree, I think, on that front about him, the Braves needing more from Matt Olson. That's 100% true. And it's the same for Riley. It's the same for really everyone in their lineup last year. I mean, other than Marcell Ozuna, I think you and I would probably agree that all of their stars, maybe you could say Michael Harris and definitely Ozuna, but everybody else that they have that's a star level player was not as good as they often or usually would project to be. Riley wasn't as good. Olson wasn't as good. Ozzy wasn't as good. Ronald wasn't there and wasn't as good even before he got hurt. Like Sean Murphy, all those guys were star level players to some renown. So while that statement does apply to Matt Olson for sure, they have to have him be better. It's also a collective, which is not to go back to the well so much here, Scott, but that's why the offense was so vexing last year because nobody other than Ozuna had a good year. It was like, man, the odds of like you have 7 or 8 stars and all those guys have bad years at the same time. It's kind of tough, but it happened.
It was unbelievable that basically everyone in the lineup had such a down year other than Ozuna. And, anecdotally, I did not do a deep dive on where Matt Olson hit the baseball last season, but just anecdotally from doing a lot of podcasts and talking about the games a lot, it felt like Matt just missed a handful of baseballs, balls that were 2 feet before the wall or balls that bounced a foot below the top of the wall. And if they go another foot, they're a home run, but instead they were a double. That's baseball. It's amazing how just a couple of plate appearances over 6 months can be the difference between a good season and a great season. It's also probably fair to say that Matt Olson is impacted more than most of his peers by the deadened baseball. Statistically speaking, it is a proven fact that the baseballs were nerfed last year. They were not nearly what they were in prior years. And while every player has to use the same baseball, a guy like Olson who hits for so much power, he elevates and lifts the ball a ton. If the balls are naturally not carrying as well as they have in prior years, it's probably going to impact him more than a player who maybe relies a little bit more on speed and has a higher ground ball rate, because obviously that's a different type of trajectory on a baseball than when you're trying to hit it 425 feet down the line.
Yeah, I had a little look at this about Matt's projected home runs, and StatCast has this thing where you can actually do it like have his same profile of batted balls, put them in a different ballpark. And there's a few ballparks where he would have hit more than 40 home runs last year, wow. and he hit 29. Like if he played in Chicago, they said his projection would have been 43 home runs, 40 in Philadelphia, for instance. There are some that actually have less too. Like if it was Kansas City, I think he goes down to like 20 in the mid 20s somewhere. So it's a little bit of variance there, but I think that like he hits a lot of long home runs as well. But also there was some flexibility there. I think his expected number was like maybe 30-ish. It wasn't like it was crazy low, but it was still a good power season, generally speaking.
So let me ask you this quickly, Brad.
Yeah.
All right. So Matt had a 117 WRC plus. I think I know your answer here, but let me ask. Over under in 2025, over under, we'll say 120 WRC plus.
Over, I think. Matt's career WRC plus is 133. And that takes into account part of his rookie season as well. Since he became a full-time guy, I think that's still the case. But going into last year, if you took out last year, it's actually 136. So he's only had 3 seasons under 120, and one of them was the shortened COVID season. So the smart money is on the over, I think, on Matt. You could have made it hard on me and said 125. I think I still might have gone over, to be honest. When you get to 130, it gets to be. I think I would project somewhere in the 130 range for Matt Olson as an over under on his WRC plus. Like Steamer has him at 127 right now. Like that's about kind of what maybe I probably lean over on that too, but somewhere in that 130-ish range. But with the upside to go, like we've seen him have a 161 and a 164 WRC plus seasons. His range is probably what? 110 to 165, 170. Like that's a pretty wide range, but that's probably a realistic one.
Yeah, I mean, again, we have seen Matt Olson's highs are very, very high.
Mm-hmm.
I would be pretty surprised if he's worse than what he was this past season. And just one other just cool note that I dug up when talking about Matt Olson here. So Matt Olson now has appeared in 162 games all 3 years with the Braves, which is not a small thing. I mean, being available and being healthy is a big part of being a professional athlete. Dating back to 2021, so pre-trade, Matt Olson has now appeared in 620 baseball games without missing one. And not only did he play all 162 this past season, but he played like 9 innings of 162 basically every single night. That's impressive. And not only that, but Brad, you probably know this already, so I'm not even going to bother quizzing you because you probably read through our document of notes. But currently, Matt Olson's streak of 620 straight games played. I'm going to give the listener a moment here to say, where does that streak rank in the history of baseball? So again, 620 games. We are going to go with, wait for it. All right, got your answer. It is the 20th longest streak of consecutive games played in the history of Major League Baseball. That goes back all time baseball history. Guys playing in like 1904. And if Matt were to play in all 162 again next season, that would move him up to 13th all time in his current streak to play all 162. So really impressive for Matt that he keeps himself in such physical condition that he is able to go out there and play every single day. It's, he's a first baseman. He's not a running back in the NFL where he just gets punished every single week. There's not a ton of physicality that comes at standing at first base. But again, for a good player, the Braves are going to want Olson in their lineup every single night. And I thought that was a cool note that if you're 20th in the history of baseball in anything, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's the longest active streak by a lot, which is not surprising given what you just said about the history of it all. Yeah, he could be in the top 15 if he does it again this year. I am, just to be consistent from our old podcast, I think it's probably a good idea to give the guy a day off every once in a while. Said the same thing with Freddie Freeman back in the day because Freddie never wanted to take a day off either. It's kind of ironic those guys are both that way. But also hasn't really had any that we're aware of, like nagging injuries like that, knock on wood, of course. But, I feel like Freddie always had something he was dealing with. There was a season where he had the wrist, and it was like he was. That was the old paper bag, whatever it was, paper newspaper that he was swinging. Wet newspaper. So I'm sure Olson's been like everyone gets hurt during the season. It's just whether you can keep playing or not. And I'm sure he's been below 100% many times. That's what has to happen when you keep playing every game. But yeah, it's a very impressive streak. I knew he had played every game for a while, but not to the extent that you had put out there. And I don't think he's going to be going after Cal Ripken, if I had to guess, because that record is probably not going to ever be broken either. But speaking of broken records, but it's impressive, and the durability is helpful because look, being out there every day has value. If you're a star player and you could be consistently available, it helps everybody else in the lineup. It helps your manager. It helps your bench guys, et cetera, et cetera. And we joked about this already about how this is going to basically be the Matt Olson preview or review or whatever you want to say, because he's the only guy that plays there. It's funny in the Fangraphs death projections, which I look at a little bit before these, they actually give 14 plate appearances to Luke Williams because they just can't put one person's name. They have to put someone there that's not Matt Olson. But every other team that I'm seeing right now, everybody else in baseball other than Matt Olson has at least three. Every team has at least 3 players getting plate appearances at first base on the projection, and the Braves have 2, and the backup is Luke Williams, who's not even going to be there. Like, okay, let's ask the question now. It's actually relevant to this conversation. If Matt Olson were to get injured for 3 weeks, what would they do at first base? And I think the answer is, I have 2 answers. I'll ask you. I won't lead the witness. What would you like to see them do if they're fully healthy everywhere else? Granted, what would you like to see them do at first base if Matt Olson were to actually be out for more than a couple days?
Great question. I would guess, and my preference would be for Marcell Ozuna to grab a first baseman's mitt and pray that night there's very little activity at first base other than Marcell putting his foot on the bag and catching the throw from whoever. That would be probably the best option for the Braves. But the short answer is if Matt Olson gets seriously hurt, this team has probably a big problem on its hands.
Yeah, that is the answer I would say as well. The other option would be Austin Riley going to first base, but then you have a third base problem all of a sudden. So I think that the simplest, easiest way, if you can trust Marcell to catch the ball at first base, is to put him there. They have tried that in the spring. Like Marcel always takes some reps at first base in spring training for this reason, basically. Like, all right, Marcel, we just might need you to hold it down for a couple of weeks at this position, and then that way you could just rotate DHs, and that makes your life a little bit easier. You don't want to have to put Riley there, because number one, Riley's a fine third baseman. There's always been the debate of how good he is, but he's fine there. So if you have a fine third baseman, as long as he's fine at third base, leave him at third base. Yeah. By the end of the Riley deal, he might be a first baseman, and that might be kind of a question that we talk about in 5 years or whatever. But At the moment, he's a third baseman, and that's where he should stay. So I just want to ask the question because, like, hey, the math is, I'm not saying this to pick on Matt, who's my guy. He might get hurt at some point, man. Like, guys just don't tend to never get ever get hurt, and maybe he won't again this year, but he does. Marcel,
and unless your DH is a former first baseman, the fact is, like, no team carries a backup first baseman.
No, not a pure one. There's no reason to.
Right.
No, absolutely not.
Especially with the way that you need a utility infielder, you need at least one outfielder. Usually you have a speed type of guy off your bench to steal a base in the ninth inning of a tie game, and then you have to have a backup catcher. It's just tough. So the Braves are not exclusive. If they lose Matt Olson, they're the only team that wouldn't have a backup plan. But frankly, as we said, I mean, if Marcel could catch the baseball, obviously the bat plays more than well enough there.
Right.
So, but let's hope for another 162 from Matt and hopefully a better season than what he gave the team last year, because when this team is at its best, Olson and Riley in particular in the middle of the lineup are really hitting the baseball.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you said that too, because if you just need somebody to catch the ball, like you have a backup infielder somewhere, like honestly, Luke Williams being there is funny on the projection, but someone like that, like for one day, you just throw your backup infielder there. You can play there, catch the ball. It's just that you need offense at first base. Like that's a position where you tend to project you get some offense from. So but you're right. No one carries that position for a reason. One more thing that we'll kind of wrap up with a little bit more of a mini projection for next year is the contract. So he has 5 years and $110 million left on the deal. It's $22 million a year annual value. They have a club option at the end of that for $20 million. I wrote this down, so I'll just say it. I feel extremely comfortable saying that if Olson was a free agent right now, even after a relatively down season, he would get more than this, especially in this market that has been inflated. Am I out of line with that? Knowing that I am slightly partial to Mr. Olson, am I wrong, or am I safe there? You think?
Yeah, you're not wrong. You are safe there. It has been the only counterpoint I would make is that the first base market this winter has been the only one that has not been like blowing away every projection imaginable.
True.
Christian Walker, who is really quite good, former Brave Christian Walker for a hot minute. Yeah. I think he was in like 2017 with the Braves. And anyway, he's been great with the Diamondbacks. Walker just got 3 years and $60 million. Matt Olson is clearly a better player and is younger than Walker.
But like 3 or 4 years too. Like isn't Walker like 34? Like he's sneaky old.
Yeah, he'll be 34.
But yeah.
Pete Alonso is not as good as Matt Olson, although he is. I think Alonso's a top 6 first baseman in the game. Mm-hmm. Alonso's market has not been great. Teams have not necessarily wanted to commit themselves to the mega payday that Alonso was looking for. But yes, I mean, if you gave Alex Anthopoulos the choice, if you said, all right, Alex, 5 years, $110 million, do you want to keep this contract or not? It would be the fastest yes imaginable. Yeah,
and that's why I'm bringing it up, really. There's not really an action item here. Like, they couldn't get it if they want to. There's no option here. It's just that I think it's just kind of good to every once in a while come back to these deals that the Braves have signed, that are these long-term deals, and say, hey, how's it looking now? And this deal still looks really good to me.
Yep.
And that's not really – I mean, again, after last season, it would have looked even better, of course, because he had been so good in 2023. But even after, again, a relatively down year for Matt Olson, he earned that contract last year, even in a relatively down season. It's only, I mean, 5 years is a long time. Like by the last year, will he be great? We'll see. He'll be 35. Like it's not too old to contribute by any means. But in the meantime, though, I do agree with you. I don't know what he would get on the market, but it would be more than this, which is all that matters for the Braves. So
you're reading my mind. I was going to say if Matt Olson was a free agent tomorrow, I would guess with him being 30 years old, he'll be 31 in the spring, I believe. 6 years, $150 million. So 6 years and 25 million per. I mean, that sounds fair to me, but this free agent market has not been a fair one. So who knows?
No.
Maybe a team would give him 7 years at $30 million a year instead of 25 and have to overpay. But the good news for the Braves is that 5 years and 110 is extremely valuable here, and one that I think the Braves deserve a lot of credit for getting ahead out of. I mean, it was like a day after the trade that they announced the extension. A pretty savvy move by Anthopoulos, as he had to pivot from moving on from a future first ballot Hall of Famer in Freddie Freeman.
Yeah, I mean, you could compare it this way. I wouldn't necessarily do this because they're different positions, and you were right to point out that first base market is a little bit more tepid. But I think Matt Olson is better than Willy Adames at baseball. And Willy Adames got 7 for 182 this winter. Again, shortstop versus first base matters here. I think there's some more value placed on Adames because he was the only guy at that spot at shortstop. Everyone has to have a shortstop. But as far as just player quality and value, I think Olson's probably a little bit better than Willy Adames, and Willie got a lot more money than Matt is owed. So I don't think he would have gotten that much, to be fair. I think your projection's about right. 160, something like that would have been probably what I would guess for Matt Olson right now. But still, that's more than what they owe him at this point. Even that club option could be, if he's still good, that's a cheap club option, $20 million at the end of this.
Yeah.
A little bit of flexibility that Alex tends to like. Okay, Scott, before we sign off, you already did this a little bit on the over-under projections for his WRC plus, but I have some projection system numbers for you. Steamer has Olson at 127 WRC plus. Zips is 126 OPS plus, so kind of in the same range there. And the Fangraphs depth chart has the Braves number 4 in baseball at first base. And as we just covered, that's entirely Matt Olson, basically. It's just like, hey, Matt Olson is right there. They're behind the Dodgers, which is Freddie. They're behind Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is ahead of him. I think I might rather have Matt Olson, honestly, but Vlad's upside is sky high, so I'm not quibbling with that. And the other one's Bryce Harper, who I mentioned before. If you want to choose Bryce Harper, I have no quarrel with that. He's a superstar player. He didn't used to be a first baseman, so he wasn't really in the mix until recently, but now he is. So does that seem right to you? Like, I feel like that's what he is. He's a top 5 first baseman, and it's a spot that the Braves don't have to worry about.
Yeah, it is. I mean, set it and forget it. And probably set it and forget it every year between now and 2029, maybe 2030.
That's the hope.
Yeah. So hopefully continued health for Matt. Hopefully an even better season offensively. And I mean, I think Matt Olson would be the first one to tell you that he feels like he should be better than what he was this past season. And that says a lot when a guy was still perfectly fine at first base and all of that. But, over under, maybe I'm being a fanboy, but I would take the over on the 127 WRC plus. I think he bounces back. I think he will benefit from having just more healthy talent around him next season too. It's just spitballing, but maybe teams avoided Matt Olson a little bit more last year just because there was not quite the depth and power that was in this lineup 2 years ago. I have a hard time seeing that deal really go sideways, even though 5 years, guy in his 30s, all of those caveats apply. I mean, really, the last 4 or 5 seasons, Matt Olson with Oakland and now Atlanta has been a very good first baseman, and basically nothing in his profile to suggest that he is going to come down from that anytime soon.
Yeah, WRC plus projection for me anyway of like in the 130 range, 35-ish homers, slug around 500. Like, obviously upside beyond that, but that's kind of what I would project as of December or something for Matt Olson. And yeah, if you could just pencil that in every day, it's very, very helpful for your roster building exercise. All right, Scott, unless you have more to add on Matt Olson, that is a podcast for a player that, again, I think we feel safe that will not be traded before we post this podcast.
Yes, if I could bet money on that, I would happily do it. We wanted to get another one of these player reviews and previews done. We'll continue to do them throughout January and even early February as spring training gets closer and closer. But we did Orlando Arcia a couple weeks ago just because of the uncertainty at that position moving forward. And then, we kind of picked and choose between Matt Olson and Austin Riley, 2 very good baseball players who are signed for a long time. And so that's a Matt Olson podcast, a very good player, and hopefully he gets back to his highs of 2023 when he was one of the very best in the game.
We agree on that. This has being posted sometimes. We don't know when it's going to go up. So please subscribe to the podcast. And the best way to find the show, little professional segue here, Scott, is that if you don't know when the show is going to post, if you subscribe to it, it'll just be delivered to you. It'll be presented to you on a platter in Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Best thing you can possibly do. So subscribe. Check us out on YouTube if you want to watch us. I don't know why you would, because I'm old. But hey, people like YouTube podcasts. I don't know who these people are. I love you all. You're probably younger than I am and better looking than I am. But hey, hopefully you does not turn you off to watch us on video.
You do a fine job, Brad. Fine job.
That's
the ladies go wild for you and Sean.
The ladies love Sean. That's been well established. Sean's a family man, so he doesn't have to take the attention. But the ladies love Sean and Steven, of course. But yeah, we'll have more coming up. I don't know what our next podcast is going to be because I don't know when this is going to post. But just stay tuned, everybody. We really appreciate it. Follow Scott on Twitter and Blue Sky at Scott Coleman 55. Correct.
That's right.
Follow us as a show at Hammer Territory. I am at BT Rowland on Blue Sky, Twitter, etc. One more plea to subscribe to the podcast. Enjoy your holidays. I think this podcast is going to post sometime during the holidays, so stay tuned for that as well. And thanks for listening, everybody. We really appreciate it. We'll see you all next time.